Ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, welcome back to another episode of the Raw Prospect Podcast. This is episode 202, and we're doing our NFL Week 13 power rankings. This week, we've got a little bit of movement at the top, maybe a little bit of movement at the back end of our top 10. So stay tuned for that. But before we get into it, make sure to subscribe to the channel if you have not already. Leave a like on the video. That really helps us out. If you're listening on audio platforms, leave a 5-star rating and review wherever you're listening to the podcast. And this show is also sponsored by our Patreon. That's patreon.com/raw prospect pod. If we do our exclusive Patreon podcast over there, that's available for free. And we would appreciate any support that you could give us over there as well. But to introduce my co-host, joining me from Houston, Texas, the Stat King himself, Mr. Michael Ween. How you doing, man?
Another edition of my favorite episode we do on this podcast, our NFL Power Rankings for Week 13, and we're going to set up the final month of the NFL regular season tonight because tomorrow starts December, and it's the most important month leading into the playoffs. This is when it gets real after Thanksgiving, as we mentioned on Raw Rundown on Monday. So let's just go ahead and jump right into the power rankings since it is past 11 o'clock Central Time. But did you want to start by talking about tonight's game, or do you want to wait until we get to the Cowboys to dive into that?
I do want to touch on it, but I think we can wait until we get to the Cowboys.
Okay.
I guess I'll start off with my number 10. For me, this week, I went with the Denver Broncos at number 10. Newly in the top 10, of course. I think at certain points in the season would have been in the bottom 10, maybe even the bottom 5 of the league. That just shows how big of a turnaround this really is. But we've said all that before. The biggest thing is the here and the now, and what type of football this team right now is a power, like just run it down your throat football team. And pause. But I mean, the additions of Mike McGlinchey and the guard they picked up from the Ravens over the offseason, that those two guys on the right side of the offensive line, when you watch the Broncos, they jump off the screen in the run game. Mike McGlinchey has his, misses in pass protection here and there, but the right side of their offensive line, they dominate teams in the run game. They maul teams. And that's really become the identity of that entire offense. So now it's all about, getting in. And from there, I mean, this team has talent all across the board. We've said that for years. And now that Russell Wilson is playing a certain level of high-level football, this team, I wouldn't consider them Super Bowl contenders, but I wouldn't want to play them. Let's just say that.
For my number 10, I went with the Houston Texans. I thought about some movement at the bottom of my top 10, but when I really thought about it, for me, it's hard for me to be too tough or too low on the Texans after a heartbreaking loss to Jacksonville. CJ Stroud continues to set rookie records. 4th straight game going over 300 yards passing. That's an NFL rookie record. And it's also the 6th time that he's also led Houston in rushing yards this past Sunday with 47. Now, that's not to say there aren't concerns with this Texans team. Number one, it seems sometimes they struggle to run the football. On Sunday, the run game didn't look very good, and that's why their quarterback led them in rushing yards. I think there are still issues mostly related to personnel, just not having the requisite personnel on defense. At times, there's a lack of a pass rush, and that hurts the secondary. There are still personnel concerns defensively, but those things will have to be worked out until the offseason. I believe in D'Amico Ryans to get that figured out. I just believe when it comes down to it, they have a quarterback playing at a really high level and a passing game that I think is good enough with all of these weapons. Tank Dell, I love. Nico Collins, I love. Dalton Schultz gets involved in the passing game. I think this is a passing game that is good enough to keep this team in games. And we've seen that. And this Sunday, what do we get? We get the 6-5 Houston Texans hosting the 6-5 Denver Broncos. And that's going to be an absolute dogfight to get to 7-5 and to have that head-to-head, which will be important down the road as we get into the wild card race.
Yeah, absolutely. That's a huge, huge game. And the Texans were definitely the team that I was considering keeping at number 10. But to me, it just came down to just December football and what I value in terms of cold weather football and just being able to run it and be multidimensional offensively. I think that's what it really came down to me. But it's very close, and I think that game coming up this Sunday, not only is it huge for uh, implications, but it also, I think, it's a clash of both teams' weaknesses. For Denver, the thing that you would point to is, can they win a shootout? And for Houston, the thing um, the thing you would point to for them is, um, what happens when you face a really tough running football team? Are you going to be able to stop the run consistently? So we'll see how that plays out. Let's move on to my number 9. At number 9, I had the Buffalo Bills, and this might be a controversial one considering they're sitting at 6-6, I believe, on their bye week currently. But to me, um, they're one of the 10 best teams in football, and I think they showed that even in a loss at Philly this week. And with Josh Allen on their team, like, as much as I get on, Sean McDermott, and as much as I, you know, see the gaps in their defense with all the injuries, with Josh Allen, they have a shot. And everybody is talking about how tough their schedule is these next few weeks and the gauntlet that they're going to be facing here moving forward. But they have Josh Allen, and I think that's what's going under the radar here. I think this team is going to be able to almost rally in terms of like trial by fire, like going through the gauntlet of a schedule week after week. It might actually be a good thing in terms of getting this team to really raise their level of play. And we saw it in that Eagles game. So we'll see how it ends up going. But for me right now, I think it was just, I can't leave them off this top 10 right now.
Casuals that don't know football would think it's controversial, but I don't because I have the Bills at number 9 as well. There aren't 8 teams in the league that can beat this Buffalo team when they're playing at their best. And it might be less than that. Yeah. When Josh Allen and that offense is operating at the level that it was on Sunday, it's very rare you see a team lose. And I have a stat for you. The Bills are the 40th team, or they were the 40th team since 1970, which was the AFL-NFL merger, to have 500 yards, 10 third down conversions, and a positive turnover margin in a game. They were the 40th team to do that such thing. However, they were the first team of those 40 teams to lose the game. Teams entering Sunday were 39-0, entering that game when those three things happened. They have 500 yards of total offense, 10 or more third down conversions, and they win the turnover battle. Bills were the first to lose. And that's why the Bills find themselves at 6-6. It's largely a reflection on the team's issues this year, for whatever reason, closing out football games. They are now 2-6 in one-score games. Sometimes it goes in your favor, sometimes it doesn't. And we can dissect the coaching decisions all day. Right now, I don't want to say I'm calling for Sean McDermott's job, but I'm not really in favor in a lot of the a lot of the decisions he's made this year. Now, injuries haven't helped this team. I'll give you that much. The injuries on defense have hurt the unit's production, and there have been some offensive inconsistencies over the course of this year that aren't reflected, in the overall makeup of this Bills team. But what you have to realize is with Joe Brady now at offensive coordinator calling the plays, that Bills offense looked explosive. It looked really good on the road in tough conditions in Philadelphia. They put up over 500 yards of offense, and they were scoring at will pretty much for most of that game, going up and down the field. This Bills team, they have a plus 101 point differential through 12 games. The 268th team in NFL history to be plus 100 or better through 12 games, but they're only the second team to not have a winning record, and it's just because for whatever reason this year, when games are close, they're not doing the job. They're not closing those games out. It's gonna be tough down the stretch to get into the playoffs, but with Josh Allen playing like that on Sunday, it gives me a lot of confidence that they will be able to somehow find their way in, even if they end up, let's say, 9-8 or something along those lines.
Yeah, we'll see how it goes, but I mean, all they gotta do is get in. That's really all it is. And if they sneak in, whichever team they end up playing, whether it's Kansas City, Baltimore, Miami, maybe even Jacksonville, they've got a shot. They've got a real shot um, at winning. So moving on, go ahead and go ahead with your number 7.
Maybe my number 8.
Right. Sorry, number 8.
My number 8, and I went back and forth on this one, is going to be the Detroit Lions. I've ultimately come back down to earth just a little bit on Detroit. I think there might be a hard ceiling on what this Lions team can ultimately achieve. Now, you look at Jared Goff, he hasn't played well in each of last couple games, had 3 turnovers last week. He threw 3 interceptions in a narrow win over the Bears in week 11, and he fumbled 3 times in a loss to the Packers this past week. So he's turned the ball over. That doesn't help. What we know about Detroit is they have a really good offensive line, and they move the football up and down the field. They're going to score points. But I've seen some warts in this Detroit defense the past couple of weeks. It just seems like that pass rush is a little bit more inconsistent than I thought it was. And they do have a tendency to have lapses in game defensively on the back end. I I still think they're going to win their division. I still think they're going to get home field. I still think they're a really good team. But I've come back down to earth a little bit on this team. I want to see what they do in December, the most important month of the football season going into the playoffs. They need Jared Goff to clean up the turnovers after playing pretty much a pretty clean first month and a half, 2 months of the season. And they're going to need this pass rush and this defense to play a little bit more consistently. But overall, I still think they're firmly in the thick of it in the NFC. I think they will end up winning their division. If you look at their schedule, you have the Saints, the Bears, the Broncos, and the Vikings twice. I ultimately look at those Vikings games as being the key down the stretch. The Broncos will be a good one, but you ultimately don't have to worry about Denver all that much considering they're not in your conference. And I think they will find a way to beat the Bears again, and they'll probably find a way to beat the Saints. I still like this offense. They just got to clean up the turnovers, but I want to see more out of this defense before I put them any higher.
Yeah. I had the Detroit Lions at number 8 as well. Right now, I sort of see it as a 7A, 7B type of situation. I see it as being very close with the team I have at number 7. But regardless, no matter the case, I think all the points you just made are why we both had them dropping a little bit this week. And Jared Goff, I think before that Ravens game, was not only playing at the best level of his entire career, was playing at I'd say a top 10 quarterback type of level, and maybe even like an outside MVP candidate, honestly. With, the lack of experience receiving talent outside of Amon-Ra St. Brown, like for the first 6 weeks of the season. I mean, it and still is, but it's been the turnovers that have come back and been the bugaboo. And it's not even, he's forcing the ball or doing, anything crazy. It's just these fumbles, these weird fumbles that keep happening. And if this becomes a trend, it's going to be really tough for them to overcome. I think there's not a huge amount of problems I see with their offense overall. I think they're going to bounce back, and I think their offense is ultimately going to fare very well in the month of December because I think it's built for the month of December. But as you mentioned, the defense and whether or not this team can win tight ball games is going to really decide how far this team goes. Because I think in a playoff setting, I do think Dan Campbell will put out a game plan and get these guys ready to play and able to get them into the fourth quarter in a tight ball game. And from that point, it really just comes down to, can they make enough plays at that point?
One thing to add before we move on. Jared Goff has been pressured more as of late. In weeks 1 through 10, he was pressured on 33% of his dropbacks. In the last 2 weeks, weeks 11 and 12, he was pressured on 46% of his dropbacks. An Achilles heel throughout Jared Goff's career has been his ability to make plays from the pocket under duress, under pressure. And that's where some of these turnovers are occurring. Only Sam Howell in Washington, with their horrendous offensive line, has had more turnovers when pressured than Jared Goff this year. 9 of his, I think it's 11 total turnovers this year have come on pressured dropbacks. So ultimately for the Lions, if they're protecting Jared Goff and he has time to throw, this team will be fine, and they're going to put up a ton of points. they're going to be productive offensively. It'll just come down to decision making late in games for Dan Campbell. How aggressive does he want to be? And then winning tight ball games when the pressure's at its highest down the stretch. But I still have confidence in the Lions to get a home playoff game. The playoffs are all about matchups. We'll see who they play. But right now, I'm not so sure that these NFC wildcard teams are going to be
challenging the top dogs.
I just don't know right now. It's hard to tell. But we'll see.
Yeah.
So who's number 7 for you?
At number 7, I have the Miami Dolphins. I think losing Jalen Phillips was massive. The offense has slowed down. I think the NFL as a whole has gathered enough tape on this Mike McDaniel offense to be able to not shut it down, but keep it from the explosiveness that we saw early in the season. And now it's been the defense that has stepped up. And without Jalen Phillips, I just worry that the pass rush is really going to take a step down. They still have Andrew Van Ginkel. They still have Bradley Chubb. They still have plenty of talent on that defense. But Jalen Phillips was, I think, the X factor for that team. And to me, the only guy that I would consider to have the potential to be a tier 1 edge guy any given game. He's not as consistent as those tier 1 guys yet, but any given game, he can go out and play like one of those guys. And without him, they don't have someone that can do that. So a little bit of a step down this week. I still think, the whole narrative, they can't win big games. I still think that's a little bit overblown. Those a few of those were really close games and were decided by a couple plays here and there. So I still think they can hang. It's just all about just limiting the penalties, limiting the mistakes, and just playing clean football.
Yeah, I think people misconstrue it when they say this team can't do this. It's not that they can't do it, it's that they just haven't done it yet. And I think that's fair in some respects. It's not fair in other respects. Look, the Dolphins, their offense is still averaging 30 points per game. It has slowed down the past 3 or 4 weeks or so, but it's because they're giving the ball away. They have 19 turnovers. That's the 6th most in the league. If this offense plays clean football, as you mentioned, they're going to win a lot of games down the stretch, and they could win the Super Bowl with just how good and explosive they are. Now, Jalen Phillips, unfortunately, going down to an Achilles injury on a short week on Black Friday, combined with the fact that, that hurts because you don't really have another guy that you can rely on consistently to go get the passer, rush the passer. And it's a defense. The good thing is it's a defense that's been playing opportunistic football since Jalen Ramsey got back. That secondary looks really good. I believe they forced, I don't know what the number was. Something like 11 turnovers, 9 turnovers since week 8. Since Jalen Ramsey returned. I have to double check that.
Yeah.
So they are playing opportunistic, but they got to clean up the turnovers offensively. They can't help it, but I think just a byproduct of the Jalen Phillips injury, we got to wait and see how good this pass rush is. And, other than that, it's a team that has the capability to beat anyone. It's just there are a couple questions one, I say, burning question on each side of the ball right now. So that's Miami. They're 8-3. They're what, third or fourth in the AFC right now, behind Baltimore, Kansas City, and Jacksonville. They're leading their division. There's not a threat in their division right now. So I'm ultimately fine with Miami sitting where they're at. I think I think this is the right spot for them, right at number 7. They're in that bubble of Super Bowl teams, in my opinion. My number 6 is going to be Jacksonville. How about you?
Same. Yeah, we've agreed on every single one other than our number 10.
Yeah, for Jacksonville, for me, I've been high on this Jacksonville team from the preseason. The past couple of weeks, particularly the last 2, they've looked more like the AFC contender I thought we were going to see. Trevor Lawrence, who's been battling through some knee issues this year, hasn't been fully healthy, I don't think. He's been banged up a little bit. He's driving the football downfield more successfully. We've seen an uptick in the usage of one Calvin Ridley after he really wasn't used a whole lot throughout the month of October for whatever reason. He suddenly returned to the spotlight. And on defense, I think Mike Caldwell, their defensive coordinator, has that unit playing really good football, or better than expected football. Josh Allen, their pass rusher, is having a career year. This defense really lives through Josh Allen getting after the quarterback. He has 12 sacks this year in generating turnovers. Are they good enough to win the Super Bowl is the question. Can they be consistent enough to win the Super Bowl, to get to the AFC Championship, and to contend with Kansas City or Baltimore or whoever else you want to put up there? We'll have to see. There's a lot of young talent, though, on both sides of the ball. And I do think they have the right coach and the right quarterback. They check those boxes when you're looking at Super Bowl teams. That Week 15 matchup with Baltimore looks like a huge game in terms of AFC seeding scenarios. So I'm waiting for that game, but I like where this Jags team is heading. I like the trajectory that they're on entering the month of December, sitting at 8-3.
Yeah. I had Jacksonville. I mean, it's pretty simple. The defense has been good to great every single week this year. It's been pretty consistent outside of like maybe 1 or 2 weeks here or there where you can nitpick. But even then, even in the games where they quote unquote got blown out, the defense has put up a good effort. If you watch the games, and this week was no different. They gave up a ton of yards, but it was really every single yard that the Texans got was like CJ Stroud just being a menace. Like it wasn't like every single yard was earned. It was just passes that were indefensible. CJ Stroud running around and, at some point, you can't have your defenders guard for 8 seconds or whatever. So, I mean, the defense looks really good. And I think that to me is what is most fascinating about this team. That right there is where their ceiling can go up a notch, is the fact that their defense is at the level that it needs to be. And Trevor Lawrence has had a very underrated season. Fantasy owners wouldn't really agree, but this is not fantasy football. Trevor Lawrence has been really solid this year. For portions of the year, it was just not being on the same page with his receivers for whatever reason. but now those things are getting cleaned up and things are clicking.
Yeah, they've won 7 of 8, and the only loss was that game against San Francisco. So ultimately, again, I like where Jacksonville's heading, the trajectory that they are on. I also love the trajectory of one team that plays in Arlington, Texas, the Dallas Cowboys.
Sir.
Now, I had them at 5. I made my list before tonight's game. And I don't know that my watching tonight's game would push them any higher, so I'm going to keep them at 5. But let's talk about it. Do you have them at 5 as well, or
I
did you?
kept them at 5. It still comes down to I got to see it in the playoffs, but tonight I think proved a couple things. One, Dak I think is a legit MVP candidate. Since week 8, he has 20 touchdown passes. The next closest quarterback has 10. The level that he is playing at right now, I think, you know, saying, "Oh, Dak Prescott is an MVP candidate," I think it would rub some people the wrong way because of his reputation. But really, if you look at it, if you look at the numbers he's putting up and the way that he is playing, if you put like a number 12 on his back and switch his name out with Aaron Rodgers, I mean, he would be the MVP. And I'm not saying the media is biased against Dak and all that, but like I think that's the reality of it. I think Dak is a legitimate MVP candidate, and I honestly think in the Eagles game coming up, the winner of that game may just win the MVP. But back to my point, the second thing I wanted to say was the penalties. The penalties just have to stop, and a couple of them I'll give our guys a pass because the refs were throwing the flag when in doubt tonight. They were really calling it tight. But regardless, this team is either first or second in the league in penalties. And the team that's first or second with them, they played tonight. So that explains all the penalties that went on tonight. But that just doesn't correlate. Like a Super Bowl team, a Super Bowl contending team, you should not be anywhere near first or second in penalties in the NFL. That's just the bottom line of it. And we've seen this problem come up before in the Mike McCarthy era. It has to get cleaned up.
Bottom line, though, is almost nobody is playing better football than Dak Prescott. And look, people that don't like Dak, people that don't like the Cowboys, the haters, whatever you want to say, they're not going to like it. But it's true. He is right in the thick of the MVP conversation, as he should be. And look, coming into tonight, I know PFF isn't the end all be all for everything, but he was PFF's highest graded quarterback in the league. And he's second. I don't know if it changed tonight, but he was second coming into tonight behind just Brock Purdy in EPA per dropback, completion percentage, and passer rating. He was second in all those categories, right behind Brock Purdy. His command of the offense is spectacular. He just looks very, very comfortable operating this offense. He's pushing the ball downfield consistently. In all the games I've watched this year from Dallas, I haven't watched every single one, but I've watched most of them. And every single game I watch, he's pushing the ball downfield, creating explosive plays. Whether it's Brandon Cooks, whether it's Schoonmaker, the tight end, or CeeDee Lamb, whoever it might be, throwing the ball over the middle of the field, throwing it to the side, and just spreading the ball around, creating explosive plays, making plays with his legs as well. This version of Dak Prescott makes the Cowboys Super Bowl contenders. That doesn't mean, though, that they will get there or that they will achieve the things they want to in the playoffs. Because as you said, we still have to see that. It's not that they can't do it, but I think the way Dak is playing, if he continues this, makes the Cowboys a lot more likely to get where they want to go than maybe they've had, in past years. Because I haven't seen this good of a Dak Prescott the past couple of years.
Yeah,
Just haven't.
I think this is the best football he's played in his entire career, and we've seen great stretches from him. But I think it's the play extension that's really done it for me. I think that's been a missing piece in his game for a while now, and he's made a concerted effort to really extend plays outside of the pocket. And I don't know if it's maybe like the leg injury was affecting like that part of his game, and maybe he's fully back now. But regardless, that part of his game is what has pushed him to the next level. And the way he's playing it kind of, I mean, it's almost comparable. It's almost a comparable style to Joe Burrow, like that pocket passer who will extend plays to throw and dice defenses apart.
Yeah. Some stats over his past 6 games, and you mentioned stats similar to this, but Dak Prescott over his last 6 games, 21 touchdowns, 1 pick, almost 2,000 yards, and a 5-1 record. Tonight, all the same things were true. I mean, a 118.6 quarterback rating. He was close to perfect. 323 total yards, 3 touchdowns, no picks, on 7.5 yards per attempt, putting up 41 points. And what for most of the game was an offensive back and forth type ball game. It's this kind of quarterback play can take you places in January. It doesn't really matter. I mean, of course, you got to play complementary football, but if he plays like this, there's no real ceiling, I think, on where Dallas could potentially go. They just have to get by Philly and or San Francisco.
Yeah.
You hope that you don't have to get by. I don't think you have to go through both, probably just one or the other. But we will see. One thing about the Cowboys that I'll add, though, is depending on what seed they can potentially get. And I think they're still definitely probably in play, maybe for that 1 seed if they beat Philadelphia next week. This Dallas team has been so good at home.
Yeah.
What is it, like 14 consecutive home wins, which I think they said tonight on the
4 straight
broadcast?
games with 30-plus points scored as well.
And they're not just winning these home games. They usually, I mean, it really wasn't the case tonight, but they usually dominate.
Yeah.
So I like the fact that they're probably going to they're definitely, well, I don't know. But we'll see. The story, though, with the Cowboys is definitely Dak.
Yeah.
It has to be.
And
Anything else you want to add?
The narrative of like, oh, they're just blowing out bad teams. Like, it's hard to blow out bad teams in the NFL, like consistently. They've like,
Yeah.
Usually it's like, okay, you blow out this bad team, but this bad team has this one guy that can give you problems and maybe make it a little closer. But every single game that they were supposed to win, they've won, and they've won big. So I think that says a lot about this team.
And in the game that they weren't supposed to win on the road in Philadelphia, they had a chance to win. They were right there. And I think we'll see on Sunday next week, as Dallas has, an extra 3 or 4 days to get ready. They're going to come out ready to play. And I think right now, my gut tells me Dallas wins next week, but we'll just have to see.
Yep.
It's going to be a dogfight. All right. Who's your number 4?
Let's see. My number 4 is the Baltimore Ravens. I think staying in the same spot for me this week. Big thing is Lamar Jackson and what he's been able to do with these receivers and the more spread out offense. We've gotten into it all before. The thing I like most about the Ravens, though, is just how easily they can, change, like just how diverse their offense is the real way to put it. I mean, 1 second they're going 5 wide, empty, and Lamar's picking you apart in the passing game. Next drive they're going power football with Keaton Mitchell, Gus Edwards, and all those guys. I mean, it's the multiple, different, ways they can do it. And then defensively, Kyle Hamilton, they've completely unlocked him. He's turning into one of the best safeties in football. I mean, he's a complete Swiss Army knife with how they use him. Um, I mean, there's not much to not like about this team. If there was one thing that you would point to, it would probably be just the fumbles. I'm pretty sure they're near the top in the league in fumbles, but that's really the only thing you can point to right now.
Yeah, it's you can make an argument they are the most balanced team in the AFC. They're second in scoring defense in the entire NFL, 15.6 points per game allowed. They lead the league in rushing, 158.6 yards on the ground per game. They're 7th in total yards. You look at their defense, and it's not just that they're good situationally, they don't allow you to score a lot of points, but playmakers and significant impact players at all 3 levels of this defense, which makes it so good. Roquan Smith and Patrick Queen both have more than 100 tackles so far this year. They've both been fantastic players this year. Then you have Jatavion Clowney, who has 7.5 sacks this year, and Justin Matabuke, who's been really productive. I think leads their team in sacks. Both been dominant in pass rush. You have a front that can stop the run. You've got it back in with guys like Kyle Hamilton, who, as you mentioned, they've unlocked. I just think this team is very, very balanced with the weapons that they have now with Zay Flowers, Odell. Losing Mark Andrews, ultimately, I don't think has hurt this team too much. And to be fair, I mean, they have had a couple what I would call uneven offensive performances in recent weeks, but it still doesn't matter because their defense is just so good.
Yeah.
And you look at what Zay Flowers is doing, the way that he has emerged, it makes this offense even more lethal. They're dominant and opportunistic on defense, and there's really nothing else that needs to be said. On Sunday night against the Chargers, they forced 4 turnovers. They overwhelmed the Chargers at the line of scrimmage at just the right moments. And they iced the game with that Zay Flowers touchdown. And Lamar Jackson, for most of this year, has looked like an MVP candidate, in my opinion. So, look, they're sitting at 9-3 right now. I believe they'd be the 1 seed in the AFC. And I think the best case scenario for this team is winning a Super Bowl. I think they're that good.
Yeah. There's no question about it that they're that good. And if it wasn't for a guy named in Kansas City that wears number 15, they would be the best team in the AFC. And you could argue they might be the best roster in the NFC or in the AFC. Maybe the most complete roster in the AFC. But that brings us to that team in Kansas City. For me, I have the Kansas City Chiefs at number 3, and I I actually have them written down on my phone as number 2 on my list. But I've gone back and forth and back and forth, and I really, honestly, with this top 3, I really think it's like whatever order you put them, I mean, is up to you. It's really just personal preference. I see them all on the same tier, and obviously we're going to see a little bit of separation once we get this game this week between the Niners and the Eagles, of course. But for now, I think all 3 of those teams are all on the same plane. I think 1A, 1B, 1C to me. And
I
we
agree.
saw their offense wake up this week. They really, once they got down 14-0, they didn't miss a beat the rest of the game offensively. And I know it was just the Raiders. And I know, like, at certain points this year, this offense, this wide receiver core has really been porous, and that's putting it lightly. But we've seen this team turning around before, and I mean, you can't count them out. You just can't.
Yeah, I agree with you on your point that these teams are pretty much the cream of the crop, the cream de la creme. You can maybe loop the Baltimore Ravens into this category if you want. Um, for me, I kept my same order as 2 weeks ago. As you mentioned, we're going to find out this Sunday.
Yeah.
San Francisco, Philadelphia. Some people still believe, and rightfully so, like that franchise guy, that San Francisco is the number 1 team in the league. And I do believe that, if I'm not mistaken, San Francisco is actually favored
By 3, yeah, and
this
that's
weekend
significant as
on
well.
the road. It is significant. And so, but ultimately, I have the Niners at 3. The one thing about the Niners, though, is that during their 3-game losing streak, and we talked about this, they struggled to, for whatever reason, generate the pass rush that they usually are able to generate. But after just 18 sacks in their first 8 games, they've posted 15 sacks in their last 3 games. The pass rush is back, and it makes this team scary to play. They got healthy. Of course, we know how great Christian McCaffrey is, leading the league in rushing yards. Brock Purdy, as I mentioned, leads the league in QBR. He leads the league in completion percentage. Still playing at a really high level. I still think with a great defense, a very well-rounded offense, an offensive-minded head coach who we've seen get this team to that game in February before, and get this team deep into the playoffs. As long as they stay healthy, there's no reason this team can't beat the Eagles on Sunday, and we're going to find out. But I kept them at number 3. Ultimately, if they beat the Eagles, they'll probably catapult themselves to probably number 1, depending on what Kansas City does. And then number 2, we'll just go right ahead. I had Kansas City. To me, I mean, if they just avoid the turnovers, they're tied with the Dolphins with 19 total turnovers this year, and the drop passes that they struggled with early on this season. This offense will be just fine. They're good enough to win the Super Bowl, especially on defense. They're allowing the 3rd fewest points per game. They have multiple defenders playing well at all 3 levels. I always mention I love their young linebackers, but I also love a lot of the players in this secondary. They've drafted really well at that position. They're developing a lot of these young players. They have a big game defensive coordinator in Spags. And I think ultimately with the emergence of guys like Rashee Rice in the passing game, look, I mean, this team is what? A Marquez Valdez-Scantling drop touchdown pass away from ultimately beating the Eagles a couple weeks ago.
Yep.
I think that with number 15 and that guy named Andy Reid at the helm, they will have as good as a chance as anyone, if not better, to go out and win the Super Bowl once again. So they're right up there in this creme de la creme with everyone else.
Yeah, of course. Andy, explain it again with those nuggies, Reed, of course. um, yeah, pretty simple. I mean,
Yep.
Kansas City, as long as they have those two guys, they're a shoe-in to be favorites in their conference year over year. For me at number 2, I kept the San Francisco 49ers at number 2. Again, where it's going to be settled this Sunday, and I cannot wait for that. But, I mean, this offense now with Debo back and now with Trent Williams back, it's right back to where they were at the start of the year. And when they have all their guys, I think they're as close to unbeatable as it gets. And that's going to be the most interesting part about this weekend is it's unstoppable force versus the immovable object. And
Yes.
I mentioned it even in our NFC Championship preview last year. It was the same exact scenario. Obviously, that game it was kind of flipped onto its head with the quarterback situation that ended up taking place. But I mean, it's the same thing over again. I mean, the Niners they lost Kalanoa Hufanga this week, I think, for the season, but I think it's more so an offensive thing. I still think the defense will be just fine. I like what Steve Wilkes has done these past few weeks, adjusting to how the 49ers like to play. I think blitzing a little bit more, playing with more 5-man fronts defensively, forcing you to get the ball out quickly. This game this weekend is going to be amazing. That's all I'm going to finish with. I'm talking in circles.
No, I mean, we could talk about that game all day. And it's well, I won't even go there. It might be a preview of what we see later on in January. We don't know that, but could be. Number 1, it's kind of hard to say they're not number 1. I think they've earned the right to be number 1. It's the Eagles. They've gotten off to some slow starts offensively as of late. But one thing we know about this Eagles team, as of right now, is they know how to close games, even when they're behind. They're averaging a league high 14.6 points per game in the second half this year. Their defense ranks 3rd against the run. They're very good on the lines of scrimmage. I think it talked about in our Raw rundown about the 3 things that I believe make this team so damn good. It's the fact that they played without their Hall of Fame right tackle Lane Johnson, and they were still able to move the ball offensively and do all the things that they do, run the football for over 140 yards, whatever they did against the Bills on Sunday. They have they're dominant at the lines of scrimmage. They're such a complete team. Even their kicker can win them games. And Jalen Hurts is just such a poised, calm quarterback in these situations. He has a confidence about him that the Eagles are going to win these football games. The one area I think you can nitpick with Philadelphia is their secondary. They and we saw it against the Bills at times on Sunday. They've yielded the second most passing touchdowns in the NFL, and they're also 29th against the pass in terms of yards given up, and they're bottom half in the league in takeaways generated. So it's not to say that they are. I don't know. They're very good on both sides of the ball. I don't know that I'd say they're elite yet on both sides of the ball, but they're very, very good, and they're 10-1. They're winning these games.
I'll say this: I'd say
Uh,
they're clutch on both sides of the ball. Let's say
yeah,
that. Um, this has been a tightrope act for the Eagles these past couple of weeks against these. Well, the Bills aren't elite. Well, against two great teams, and you know, the first half of that Bills game, I'm like, okay, this is where they fall, right? I'm a Cowboys fan. So obviously, I was cheering for them to lose, and I mean, Jalen Hurts is just incredible. What he did in the second half was, I mean, probably the best half of football played by a quarterback this season, if we're being completely honest. Only to be second by maybe Josh Allen and what he did in the second half. But nonetheless, um, I still think they missed their coordinators from last year. I still think they missed Shane Steichen. They missed Jonathan Gannon. They're not quite as sharp in terms of one, just their play calling and, you know, stacking plays together in a way that puts defenses in binds. And defensively, I think their stunts aren't quite there as often. And I think their blitzes aren't quite as effective. But even so, I mean, it's just been that their talent is so freaking insane that they're able to just overcome all of it. And if at any point these coaches figure it out and they find the blueprint to, you know, get the scheme right consistently, I mean, the NFL is like freaking done for, honestly. It's
yeah.
it's so scary, honestly. Like, why is this team in my division? Like, why?
No, I mean it's. But hey, as a Cowboys fan, for at least for you, you have the opportunity next week
Yep.
to take them down, and I think there's a good chance of it happening, because as you mentioned, it has kind of been a high wire act for the Eagles this year, but they're winning these games, and it's a different business in the NFL than it is in college football because it's a different system, and all that matters at the end of the day in the NFL is winning.
Yep.
That period by 1 point, by 2 points, by 10 points, by 20 points. All that matters is that you win. And here the Eagles are sitting at 10-1. Now, we're right at pretty much an hour. So we did that pretty efficiently. One of the things that we were going to do is we were going to live stream tonight's game, or at least the second half of tonight's game. We didn't ultimately get to do that. There are some great options this weekend to live stream if we wanted to. If you've been living under a rock for the past week, uh, we get Oregon and Washington rematch tomorrow night in Las Vegas. That's going to be an absolute show. Then on Saturday, there are a ton of options. Particularly, I look at that Georgia-Alabama game as a potential live stream candidate, although I don't know your work schedule. And then on Sunday, we all know about the 49ers-Eagles matchup. And there are other good games we could live stream as well, but those are the standout games to me this weekend. And so we'll see what we can maybe work out. If not, next week has a lot of good options as well, as we'll get Bills, Chiefs, and 49ers or Eagles, Cowboys. So there will be a live stream, I would say, in the next week and a half or so. So keep on the lookout for
Yeah.
that.
And
Um,
once we decide on that, we'll get that out on Twitter in terms of what that
yes.
schedule will be. So go ahead and follow us over there if you haven't already. I believe our ad is just Raw Prospect Pod, I'm pretty sure. So
Tomorrow, NBA episode. It's finally going to come. I'm guessing we'll be live. We're going to be doing a NBA power rankings as we're now entering, as of next week, the knockout round stage of the in-season tournament. So we're going to be doing a snapshot top 10 power ranking of how each team has been playing up until this point. It is playing currently. Then we're going to be taking a group of rookie players, about probably 6 or 7 rookie players. We're going to be grading them on their performance based on a set of criteria this year. And then if we have time at the end, we will get into a little bit of the in-season tournament. It's going to be a fantastic episode. It's really going to be our first in-season NBA episode. We have a lot to get to. And then probably after Oregon, Washington, I'm going to do Dit Hole. May or may not have a guest. We'll see. But I'm going to be recapping that game, Oregon, Washington. I'm going to give you my prize pick locks for this weekend in the conference championship games. And then I have some college basketball stuff I want to get to, along with some Texas rumors. So it'll be a big night tomorrow on the Raw Prospect Podcast YouTube channel. So make sure you guys are tuned in. Thank you guys for watching tonight. Another great episode of Power Rankings. We will continue to do this bi-weekly up until the playoffs.
Yep.
Where things will change a little bit.
Oh, yeah.
But anything else? Any parting shots before we get out of here?
One thing I will say is one idea that I threw at you early on in the season was doing a sour rankings, which would be the opposite of our power rankings, which would be ranking the bottom 10 teams and talking about their situations. And I think in the next few weeks here, we might be able to get to that as well. So keep an eye out for that if you're interested. If maybe one of your teams is terrible at football by chance, then maybe that's for you. No offense.
No, I think that may be something we get to eventually here in the next 1 or 2 weeks. We will see. But definitely, if you didn't catch it last night, go back and watch Dit Hole. That was a fire episode of Dit Hole. So much so that I went back and watched it after we recorded it.
Yeah, I mean, I feel like that was probably one of the best episodes we've had in months. I feel like our energy was just up a gear almost. I don't know. I think the new idea we had with Gut Check, I think that's going to be a staple of our podcast moving forward. And if you haven't already, if you don't know what Gut Check is, that's a good, I guess, teaser into what it is in that segment at the end of that episode last night. So definitely go check that out. I'm going to be posting that onto Spotify and audio platforms here ASAP after this episode. So keep an eye out for that. But yeah, that's going to be it. I'll unless you got anything else to say, I'll let you sign us off.
One more thing. Big news in college basketball today.
All right.
Bronny James will play this year, which I'm super excited about. LeBron said earlier, not sure if it was earlier or when he actually said this, but he said he would miss the Lakers game to go watch Bronny's debut if he has to. I don't know when he'll actually get on the court and play, but he was cleared by doctors today, which is great news for the scene of college basketball. Imy will be joining Dit Hole next week for a special edition, early season edition of Dit Hole. But we just finished up with the ACC SEC Challenge. I'll talk about some of that tomorrow. But this upcoming week, starting tomorrow, we're going to have the big Big 12, Big East challenge, if you will. Texas plays Marquette next Wednesday, but UConn plays Kansas tomorrow evening. So if you have a chance to tune in to ESPN2 while you're flipping back and forth between Oregon, Washington, or whatever else you're watching, that UConn-Kansas game in Fog Allen, expect that to be a great game. But with all that being said, thank you guys for watching. And just like Frank Reich's time in Carolina, unfortunately for Frank Reich, we are going.
I've got
Peace.
one. Just like the the fine that was be sent in from the league offices once LeBron misses a game to watch his son. Just like that money, that cash money from LeBron's pocket, we're going. God.